All right, good afternoon. I have the pleasure of being the last person to go today. So if anybody falls asleep, I'm going to practice my teaching assistant skills and call you out. No, not really, don't worry. It is a really big privilege to share my work at the symposium today. I'd like to thank Dr. Seafried and Dr. Wilson for inviting me, and the Alabama Department of Archives and History for hosting us. And I'm really especially honored to present here today alongside so many scholars who I admire and look up to. Especially my co-panelists today have been a big part of the historiography in my dissertation, so I'd like to thank them for helping get me here, even if you didn't know that. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to encourage us to think about commemoration that does not use memorials, monuments, or cemeteries. I'm going to demonstrate instead that intangible forms of commemoration play just as large and important of a role in how Americans remembered World War I. To do so, in my very recently completed dissertation, I coined the term Veteranist-Commemorations to describe the service-based memorialization projects advocated by American women who served and sacrificed in the First World War. And I called these women female Veteranist commemorators. Rejecting traditional monuments, female Veteranist commemorators placed the plight of male and female veterans at the center of their memorialization efforts. Women's Veteranist commemoration projects did not solely address veterans of strictly defined military service, but they actually included anyone who served or sacrificed in any way, including mothers. Now, my presentation today examines the American War Mothers, an organization founded in 1917 to unite the mothers of America's service members during and after World War I. In my larger chapter, I argued that because these war mothers saw themselves as having served the nation during the war, they adopted Veteranist commemorations as their main way of memorializing it. They believed that their roles as mothers required them to continue their wartime service by focusing their commemorative efforts on helping veterans and other war mothers, rather than just building the physical monuments so popular at the time that we have heard about. In my remarks today, I'm also going to focus on three major points. Now, these 3 points comprise this argument. First, that the American War Mothers defined motherhood as a form of service to the nation that contributed to the war effort and the Allied victory. Second, the American War Mothers believed that supporting veterans was one of the best ways they could memorialize World War I. And third, because they too had supported the war effort, the American War Mothers also focused their Veteranist commemoration activities on helping fellow war mothers. I will begin with a very brief history of this organization. Alice Moore French founded the American War Mothers in Indiana in 1917, after her son left to serve in the Army. Already active in women's clubs and civic life, French responded to the state of Indiana's request that the mother of a soldier help them with their food pledge campaign. Mrs. French used her new position to form the Indiana War Mothers, an organization she intended to help support the war effort, advocate for the welfare of service members, and unite their mothers. By the fall of 1918, the fledgling organization had written a national constitution and expanded to become the National American War Mothers, and there were quite a few chapters here in the state of Alabama. In 1925, Congress officially incorporated the American War Mothers. After the war, the organization had actually evolved into a patriotic association focused on supporting veterans and commemorating the war. It consisted of national, state, and local chapters with national officers who presided over the whole organization and ran their national conventions. The Constitution of the American War Mothers delineated how Veteranist commemorations formed a key part of their mission. Among other things, it directed the organization to, quote, keep alive and develop the spirit that prompted world service, and to maintain the ties of fellowship of that service, and to assist and further any patriotic work. So although they did not actually use the words commemoration or memorialization, these phrases indicated their intentions to memorialize the war. To become a member, a woman had to be a female American citizen with a son or daughter of her own blood who had served in the military service of one of the Allies. These restrictions limited membership to biological mothers and excluded non-citizen immigrants. Overall, the organization was dominated by upper and middle-class white women. The organization tried to remain apolitical and inclusive of members no matter their political beliefs. However, the American War Mothers acted in the context of their time, which meant that racial equality was not the norm. African Americans were often segregated into separate chapters, and I explore this issue in much more depth in my dissertation, but suffice it to say that segregation caused great debate among the diverse and geographically distant organization. I will now move on to my first major point, that the American War Mothers considered motherhood to constitute a form of service to the nation. More specifically, as mothers of service members, they believed that they had also contributed to the war effort and the Allied victory. This idea emerged from the concept of Republican motherhood. From the time of the early Republic, American women had been encouraged to support the nation by raising their children to become patriotic American citizens and sending their sons off to serve in the military. In this way, women were seen as contributing to the nation while actually still remaining in the domestic sphere. During World War I, Republican motherhood played an influential role in American women's contributions to the war effort, as well as the public's perception of their participation. The mother actually became a symbol of American patriotism, especially as depicted in imagery such as the American Red Cross posters that featured the world's greatest mother, an example shown here. The American War Mothers embraced this iteration of Republican motherhood, as well as contemporary ideas asserting that mothers played an important role in society, especially through community service. As a result, the American War Mothers did not consider their organization to be an auxiliary group based only on their familial connection to a military member. Rather, they actually formed this group as a way to serve, and they subsequently developed into an organization based on that service. This leads me to my second major point. As women who served the nation, the American War Mothers chose to commemorate the war through Veteranist-Commemorations, especially projects that specifically helped veterans. This does not mean, however, that they rejected all forms of traditional commemoration, such as monuments, memorials, and ceremonies. They held annual Mother's Day ceremonies at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. They issued a commemorative stamp in 1934, and some of their local chapters did build small memorials in their communities. However, the organization as a whole did not create a permanent national statuary monument to commemorate World War I. Instead of focusing on these statuary memorials, the American War Mothers concentrated on what I call these Veteranist Commemoration projects. As mothers of the nation, all levels of the organization prioritized service to veterans and the militaries, and they actually defined these types of activities as a form of commemoration. Founder Alice French emphasized the obligation to support veterans in her speech to the 1923 National Convention. She connected the group's mission to the graves of the American boys buried overseas, which Dr. Boudreau just introduced us to. She explained how, quote, "Ever since the armistice was signed, we have been looking for an individual to pick up the torch. But you know, I believe, mothers, the boys are talking to us. Let us take up the torch, individually and collectively. I believe the boys are here. I believe they are speaking. I believe they are counting on you, mothers, to take up the torch," end quote. Influenced by her visits to the overseas military cemeteries, French articulated a clear vision of her organization's post-war mission. This mission was to honor the war's memory by taking up that torch of service to help surviving veterans. I will only mention two of the organization's most significant initiatives today, but the minutes of their convention records are filled with hundreds of pages recounting their charitable work towards veterans. One of their biggest and most well-known national initiatives that helped veterans was their annual sale of carnations before Mother's Day. Members sold paper carnations made by veterans and their families, and they used the proceeds to fund welfare work that benefited these families. They made the campaign a national effort, and they sold these carnations in big cities and small towns across the country. Through the carnation sale, they achieved two goals. First, they helped honor and commemorate service members, their families, and the war mothers who were selling the carnations. Second, they supported needy veterans and their families through their traditional roles as caregivers. As mothers, the organization recognized that helping only veterans was not enough, and that their families also suffered and needed support. In addition to the carnation sale and the many activities of the individual chapters, in 1925, the American War Mothers spearheaded another major national project to help veterans and their families. They built and supported the American War Mothers Memorial Home, adjacent to the Fitzsimmons Veterans Hospital. Now, this home was intended to safely lodge visiting female veterans at a modest price. Located 9 miles from Denver, Colorado, the hospital itself was a living memorial building named in honor of Lieutenant W.T. Fitzsimmons, the first American officer said to die in the war. Even though it was one of the largest veterans hospitals, its hard-to-reach location made it expensive and difficult for women to visit the patients. Now, these women could stay at the home for a nominal fee or even for free. The American War Mothers formed a committee to oversee the home's operation, and they constantly raised money to support it throughout the years. And they actually dedicated the home in honor of Gold Star mothers, women whose children died during the war. So instead of erecting a memorial to Gold Star mothers, they built a home to help veterans and their families cope with the consequences of combat. The home demonstrated the American War Mothers' support for utilitarian and living memorials, which we have learned today are memorials with a practical purpose that help the community. And I think it's particularly significant that the American War Mothers chose to honor Gold Star mothers through an institution that helped visiting female relatives. By choosing to memorialize women by serving other women, they emphasized their dedication to public service as well as women's wartime sacrifices. And much of the money that was used to support and pay for the home had actually been raised through the carnation sale. So this made the home a philanthropic venture built through other acts of community service. I find this really interesting. You have community service funding other types of community service. In its first year of operation alone, more than 150 mothers and wives of patients were lodged at the home, and 27 of these women actually received accommodations for free. In 1944, as we see here on the screen, they dedicated a new annex building that provided much-needed assistance to the families of the wounded soldiers from the Second World War, now pouring into the hospital. The home's dedication demonstrates my third and final major point, that the American War Mothers also focused their Veteranist-Commemoration projects on helping fellow war mothers. They reminded the nation that they too had supported the war effort and deserved to be commemorated. Much of the assistance to fellow war mothers came in the form of social welfare programs that helped mothers who had fallen on hard times. In an era when social welfare was only just starting to be provided by the government, these women actually took it upon themselves to provide for one another. For example, in 1929, the fourth Vice President, Mrs. Peter Campbell, assisted one Gold Star mother in getting her dependency claims, and she helped another obtain her son's bonus. During the Great Depression, they increased their efforts to support war mothers, many of whom actually sought help at the organization's headquarters in Washington, D.C. One of the other major ways the organization helped fellow war mothers was through their support of the Gold Star Mothers and Widows pilgrimages. These pilgrimages sent women whose children and husbands were buried overseas on an all-expense-paid government voyage to visit their graves in the American Battle Monuments Commission cemeteries. Many members of the organization were eligible for the trip, so they formed a national committee to lobby in support of the pilgrimage legislation. Member Ethel Stratton Knock, a Gold Star mother very active in their cause, served as liaison officer for the Gold Star pilgrimage in 1929. After visiting her son's grave at the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery in France at her own expense, she believed in the importance of extending this opportunity to all eligible Gold Star women. She told the American War Mothers National Convention how since her own trip, quote, "My greatest object in life was to bring the comfort I had received to all other mothers of our glorious sons, whose bodies are guarded by the stars and stripes in the battlefields of honor overseas," end quote. After honoring the memory of her own son, Knock dedicated herself to helping other mothers gain similar closure, rather than building or supporting a traditional memorial project. This circle of service and commemoration rejected traditional memorial practices in favor of a veteranist commemorations focused on the war's survivors. To conclude, throughout the interwar period, the American War Mothers continuously worked to support veterans and war mothers through veteranist commemoration projects intended to memorialize World War I. Because these women defined motherhood as a form of national service, they believed the best way to memorialize the war was by continuing that service. Instead of erecting a grand national monument, they wanted their philanthropic deeds to constitute their organization's memorial. However, such acts of community service are often intangible, ephemeral, and less recognizable than statuary memorials. As the centennial of America's entrance into the First World War approaches, it is important that we recognize these less obvious memorials and the many women behind them. While we commemorate the men who fought in the First World War, I personally hope that an understanding of the American War Mothers program of veteranist commemorations will help us to also memorialize the American women who served their nation during the war, and most importantly, served their nation and its veterans long after the guns had been silenced. Thank you. And if I can just add, I have packets of information on the American Battle Monuments Commission. If you have not received one, please let me know and we'll try and get you one.